Hey, hey!
Hey, Tara.
Andre, we're just about to start, everyone, but we thought we would. Actually, our title's on today.
Yeah, I think we should go ahead and start.
We should just start?
Yeah, we've got a lot to say, and it's already 11
Okay. Well, we
Eastern
are Eastern Standard Time.
Standard Time now. We've changed our clocks, whether we like it or not. It is
Yes,
Standard Time.
it is. It is.
Mhm.
So, welcome, everyone. Welcome.
Hello, hello.
We're streaming as well to YouTube today, so we'll see if that works. One of our
Mm.
members, Jay Scott Long, is like checking it out for us. So Jay, let us know how that goes.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic. Thanks, Jay.
yeah. So yeah, happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Wow,
Here we
you
are.
really made our notes really big. Can
Yeah.
you make them a little smaller so I
Sure.
can see more at once?
You read them one word at a time, right?
Awesome. No.
All right.
So today, as you saw from the title, is on communication and miscommunication.
And
Maybe we're having a bit of it right now.
yeah, I think we could be an excellent demonstration of miscommunication. We had a little miscommunication on the weekend.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about it now. Let's talk about it a little as we go on.
Sure. As you
Okay.
wish.
So, oh, stealing my smoothie. So, have you ever tried to communicate something to a partner or lover and found that it just didn't land right?
Wow.
I know that I have, for sure.
It's almost the exception when it does land right, right? There's
Does
so
it?
much. Well, yeah, it seems like communication is already a setup where it's going to be likely that it's not going to work because what happens is,
Oh no,
well,
not
yeah,
likely to work.
yeah, in a way, if you think about it, because what it is, right? So we have a thought or a feeling that we try to communicate. How are we going to do that? So through language, we have identified these symbols that kind of more or less convey the thought or the feeling, and then we put them together with other symbols and we put it out there. And now we have to hope that when we throw that out there, it's going to be the way that we had imagined it. And then it has to be received in that order, in that way that it was sent. And then that person has to unpack it and say, oh, that's what the person was thinking. So it seems like it's fraught with it. It's like, it's fantastic when our communications actually do go through the way we've intended them.
Mm-hmm.
And even at that, what is it that I'm thinking and feeling? And which symbols am I going to pick to put together that's going to convey that? So I mean, it's just like,
so a lot of moving parts. It's
Moving
like when you
parts.
have like that puzzle and it's missing like one or two parts,
Mhm.
maybe. So it's a skill. It's
Yeah,
a skill,
well-
and it's something we're not necessarily taught. Like I don't know if anyone really taught me how to do it. And sometimes
Mhm.
it's through observation, and we often learn the wrong ways of communicating,
That's
like
true too, yeah.
sarcasm or avoidance
Right.
or that sort of thing.
Right,
So
right. And a lot of those nonverbal communications come
exactly.
through too. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why for today we're talking about the 5 ways to make sure your communication is not miscommunication.
Oh, good.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, but before we jump in,
But can I say one thing about it?
sure, go for it.
As you say, it's a skill, right? So it needn't be done perfectly, and there's no expectation that it must be done perfectly. We try to communicate. We remain open to the possibility, right? So as long as we're still making that gesture of generosity and being a listener and a communicator, there's a chance that we might get our message through and we might be able to receive the other person's message. So it needn't be done perfectly, but we continue to try and
Yeah.
participate.
And one of the things I think you can do too, and what I'm trying to learn is being curious about why it didn't work out. Like I know we had a bit of, as we were preparing for this today, we had a bit of a recap of what happened yesterday in our communication and what happened and why it might have, gone the way it did. But I think that's what I love about being with you is that I feel like we can do that. So yeah. So, but before we jump in, so go ahead.
Well, being able to do that is wonderful. But as we were saying that, yes, I remember. And I think at one point I found myself getting a little heated in the
heated.
thing, right?
Me too.
Which
I was getting upset. I was not getting heated. I was getting upset.
Okay. Call it as you wish. But I think that it's also good to be aware of when we're getting heated like that because that is informing us, right? It's telling me, wait a second, I'm trying to put this communication through and it's not being received the way I want it to, or they're insisting, saying the same thing and I'm not getting it. And I become frustrated, and that's the heated part, or
upset. I was getting frustrated for sure.
Heated, upset, frustrated. But it is while it might be sticky and uncomfortable at the moment, those things can inform us that, well, wait a second, something's not working quite right. And as you said, we can unpack it afterwards when we're a little calmer and be able to say, well, what were the components at play? What was interfering with us being able to have successful communication?
Yeah.
And was it being miscommunicated, misunderstood, or communicated and understood?
And sometimes that unpacking when you're not in the heat of the moment is a good idea. But we're going to get into that. But first, before we jump in, a word from our sponsors, which is us. We don't have any sponsors now.
We get like Trojan sponsorship.
I just listened to Polyamory this morning, the podcast. If you haven't listened to that one, it's a great one if you're involved in open relating.
Yeah,
and one of their sponsors is Field, which is I was like, wow, that's pretty major. Like a big online dating profile thing, which we use and we're familiar with and we've shared with people too. But
we're on that, but it's mostly perverts, isn't it?
No.
And I said it in the most loving way because we're on that. There are. It's not your average run-of-the-mill kind of profile, I guess.
That's
in a
right.
way, it's not. It is OkCupid with a little bit of a spice to it.
Yeah, what they were saying, which was interesting. Apparently, when Field was first started, it was started primarily for people to meet adding people to relationships, but it's evolved to something more where it's more about sex positivity and all kinds of different relationships and all kinds of different identities and sexualities and all that stuff. So I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. But we totally went off topic. So we have no sponsors. It's just us. So as us, we wanted to make sure you were aware, if you weren't always already aware, that we have a workshop this Thursday called Rightsizing Jealousy and Increasing Security in Non-Monogamous Relationships. It's Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's with being done in cooperation with SHIP, which is we know sexual health includes pleasure. There's tickets. You need to buy a ticket and register in advance. And it is a paid workshop. But what's awesome about SHIP is because they're a nonprofit organization, they offer pay what you can and free options. So don't let the payment stop you if this is something that you feel aligned to attend. And we'd love to see you there, especially our awesome members.
Yeah, and it's applicable to everybody. I mean, who hasn't felt jealousy? But it's interesting because if we can right size and reduce our level of jealousy, we might have more pleasure.
Pleasure, yes.
Yes.
And who doesn't like pleasure?
Who doesn't?
Okay, right. So let's move on to communication. So let's start with the basics. So what are the components of successful communication and how do we communicate what you call successful patterns of communication? I thought the patterns was an interesting thing when we were talking and preparing for this because I've never thought about communication as having patterns, but having worked with some couples and that sort of thing where communication is one of the main things that they're having difficulty with, I can see how we can set up unsuccessful patterns of communication.
Yeah, and we just keep perpetuating it, right? Until we are able to correct those things, we will continue that repetition. So when we're able to identify what the components are, then we can find ways to speak more successfully, communicate more successfully, listen more successfully.
I'm seeing that there's comments in here. Hello and good morning, Aubrey and Drang. And someone's saying, I spend too much time overthinking what I'm feeling, trying to put in the right words that will land right. But in the meantime, I'm rotten at hiding the fact that I'm struggling with something. So my partner sees it and asks, but I'm still not ready to share and tensions rise. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to say those things and we want to say it right. So there's the other thing is, that we can sometimes get caught in that and worried what their response is going to be, right?
Well, and then sometimes it's a question of semantics, right? Is it a question that we're feeling heated or frustrated? Right. So do they essentially mean the same thing or similar things? Is the feeling similar, right? So maybe we don't have to worry so much about the exact word that's being chosen. Hopefully there's some spirit of generosity that allows for some wiggle room in that. Really, it's the sentiment, the idea, the thought that's being conveyed. Can we pick up on that?
Right.
So maybe it's not so much about the actual words, although when we become more skilled at it, we had better pay attention to which words we are choosing.
Oh, yes, because some people pay attention to words.
Well, it's thought that of all the possible words, what made you choose this particular word? Right?
I know.
Because we become rather skilled in our demonstration on how to use these symbols. So they can be quite effective. But initially, what we're really after is trying to communicate these thoughts, feelings, and ideas with each other. And there is that question of generosity, right? We want to be generous in sharing our thoughts and feelings and also the way that we receive them with the other person.
But I think sometimes, and I'm going to say this live on camera, is I'll say a word and you'll jump right on it because you were like, oh, that was an interesting word to choose. Or if I've said the wrong word, because then you said there's no negative in the subconscious, in the unconscious. So then I get caught up in like, but I didn't mean that. And then, you're like, but you did.
Well, you might not have meant it, but yet it came to your mind enough that you tried to negate it.
Can't we just make mistakes sometimes?
Oh, for sure. We always make mistakes. I'm like fantastic at making mistakes. That's my forte.
We all make mistakes.
Yeah, for sure. It's human. That's okay.
But as long as we learn from them. Okay. So I liked your analogy you kind of talked about before, this idea of baseball, as successful communication.
Could be hockey.
Or football. True. Oh yeah. I immediately thought baseball. I should have thought hockey. So you said successful communication is where a thought, a feeling or idea or belief is spoken or articulated, and received is the intended. So you throw the ball or you hit the ball and it's caught.
Right. Or puck. Right.
And then miscommunication
is when it's not done successfully, obviously, right? So that ball, that puck is either not thrown well, so I don't articulate what it is I'm wanting to say, or it's not caught well. The listener is not understanding everything. I don't hear what you were saying. And that makes me think about the other thing. Very often when we are listening, or so-called listening, we are already formulating our response even before the person has finished their sentence or their idea, right? So it's like, how am I going to formulate my rebuttal to what's being said?
I just realized, I know I do that, and I just realized as you were saying that, I totally did that.
The proof is in the pudding.
No, but seriously, it's like, ooh, but when you know, right? You can catch yourself. I totally caught myself.
Right. So you become aware of it, right? So you become, and then, as you said, it's a skill, right? So we become aware that we might already be looking for how we're going to respond to it, and we've stopped active listening. Whereas I think maybe you might be able to expand a little bit on how we're able to foster that skill. How can we become better listeners? How can we take a more active role in listening so we can receive what's being put down? Right?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to talk about that in a bit, but I was just thinking, I did it. I totally did it again. But I thought of it just before you started talking. So maybe that's okay. How your mom, hi mama, who watches our like weekly,
Bonjour,
said, bonjour, notice that when we're doing this, sometimes I interrupt or I jump on what you're saying. And so sometimes I think I'm excited, but I think it's also what you said, oh no, is that I'm thinking ahead to the next thing instead of listening. And I've definitely caught myself doing that.
Right. But, it's interesting though, because in the beginning of a relationship, you're like, wow, when they speak, I get so inspired. I want to say something. And yet when it is the argument that's in process, then it's like, oh man, the guy's not even listening to what I'm saying, or I'm not listening. I just want to get my point across. So Audrey says, active listening versus listening to respond is something I'm learning. So it's great to have that awareness of it and be able to moderate it, right? So can we really listen, be present, emotionally present in listening to the person, and then formulate our response.
So when we were doing research as well for this show, I found an article by Dr. Amy Corey who wrote this book called The Evolution of Human Communication from Theory to Practice. So we'll drop the link. There's a chapter online that we found, but I thought that she had a really great definition of communication. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
So I'm going to look over here because the notes are over here. Communication is the process of creating, interpreting, and negotiating meaning. Oops, going too fast. Communication can be verbal, nonverbal, or textual. It can be oral, visual, or even physical. Although communication occurs in a variety of different ways, it's always a learned behavior. While most human beings are born with the physical abilities to speak, hear, and see, and so on, we must learn to communicate through codes, symbols, and systems of language. And this way, communication is a collaborative, collective process. So she goes on to a couple of different types of communication models, which I found fascinating. We can't go into it now, but I just wanted to share. I have a little diagram. I thought
I love diagrams. I love visuals.
I love a little.
Is it a cartoon?
It's not quite.
It's almost like a cartoon.
Yeah. So this is what's called the interactional model of communication. So you can see that it's hard to see. I don't know who did that. It's not very accessible. If we ever did something like this, we'd have to fix it.
Okay.
But the speaker is on our left side, and the receivers on the right hand side. And the idea is that they have their own fields of experience, and they do overlap. And then there's like this message and feedback loop, which would be ideal in an interactive model of communication.
As opposed to it being directive, right? Where your boss is just telling you something and they're not looking for a response. Yeah. They just want you to get that message and that's it. Right?
Yeah, she talked about like transactional as well as like a linear process. So sometimes it's just a linear. So I think when your boss, and sometimes with each other and in relationships, we have a linear communication, which isn't always the best way.
No, not necessarily. But yeah, what we're talking about, what we're wanting to achieve here is really more egalitarian, right? We want to be able to each have equal footing in this, right? It should be balanced, and I hear what you're saying, you hear what I'm saying, and we find out that it is viable, understandable.
But sometimes you have to approach someone with a conversation, difficult conversation. So you may be the initiator of the conversation. I feel like I should move over.
Come closer.
Oh, there.
There you go.
Okay. So how can we have more successful conversations and communication?
That's a good question.
Okay. You want to start?
Speak from a position of inclusion, right? So using I or me. So in those difficult conversations, especially when we're opening it up, for example, or even during the conversation, especially during the conversation, we might say something like, when this happens, I feel that, or I think that, or when that happened, it made me feel as if. So what's happening is I am putting forth my position, my thoughts, my feelings, and by using the I, me, as opposed to saying, well, when you did this, you made me, and you did that, it is protecting the other person's ego, right? Because what happens is when we hear you did this, you did that, right away, well, if we don't think that that's true, or even if we do, we might want to offer some defense, and very often the defense comes out in aggressive tones, right?
Yeah. Well, as soon as someone says, you did this, you did that, you caused this, you did this, you automatically will go to the defense. So if you're wanting to introduce something, you could say, I'd like to talk about blank with you first. First, I'd like to get your point of view. So that also invites dialogue. So maybe I want to talk about the conversation we had yesterday on the street when we were trying to like pick a place to have breakfast.
Right.
But first, I want to hear what your feelings about it. So that's another way of like inviting dialogue where the person feels more included. Or I think we may have different perspectives about X. I'd like to hear your thinking about this, or can we chat about this? I'd love to share my feelings about this.
It's interesting. So listening to what you just said, I heard you making the invitation for dialogue. Right. So it's not just that we're going to speak, in a pontificating way, and we just speak at the person. We're trying to invite this dialogue for communication, right? It's communal. It is shared.
Yeah, and it gives a space for there to be that conversation. Like I think one of the common things that we hear from people when they're in non-monogamous relationships, especially if they're new or if they've recently changed things. Like I know some people, because of COVID, they had kind of shut things down and became monogamous. I think we sort of like a lot of people by default, if you're nesting with somebody, you may have become more monogamous and decided to open up again. So you're reintroducing a way of being in a relationship that's new again. And there may be feelings, or you may feel different about it. And where was I going with this? I don't know.
Being willing to share your feelings about it and how you're communicating? No. What came to your mind? I'm listening.
I forgot. I mean, I think something in the notes triggered it, but I don't even know where I was going to go with it. Oh well, we'll get back to it. You always say I'll get back to it, but I think you get in these situations where you're feeling uncomfortable about something, and you want to have that dialogue with the person, but maybe you had an agreement before and you feel it's difficult to talk about these things, or you feel like you're burdening them. You know what I mean? So how do you invite like dialogue on that? It's like, this is how I'm feeling. I'd really like to talk about this,
So you might want to revisit some of the agreements you've had, or something comes up and you're
Sometimes.
wanting to introduce that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how are you going to do that? Well, that's, I think, where we were leaving off, right? That you might speak from the I or the me, saying, when that happened, it made me feel this thing, and I'd like to speak about it, or I was thinking that we could have this conversation about it.
Yeah.
So the whole sentiment about this really is that we want to invite as opposed to communicate, accuse, right,
Yes.
in our communication.
Yeah. When you go out on a date with this person, I feel this.
Right. Okay.
Oh, weird. Oh no.
Yes.
Oh, I think because we're on YouTube, there's some weird messaging going on. Webcam. Uh-oh. Watch stream. Girls here. Oh dear. Maybe we don't want to go live.
Not an affiliation.
Because we can't delete those.
Okay.
Anyways, so let's go on.
Yeah, let's go on.
Okay, so number 2.
So be clear, honest, concise, and direct. But that's not to say to be necessarily rude when we're being direct or inconsiderate, right?
Correct.
We want to be considerate, but we want to be as direct as possible. We want to be as honest as possible, but also always considering that it might be whatever the message is, might potentially be hurtful to the other person to have to hear sometimes, right? So,
or it may change something that they had previously discussed, like we were just discussing. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So how are we going to present it? How are we going to frame it that it's not going to just put up the other person's defenses, but they're still going to be hopefully relatively open to hearing what it is we're wanting to communicate. Because if we don't communicate our investments, our theories, our feelings, and we simply hold them or minimize them, it then opens up for the possibility of resentments, and resentments are toxic in relationships, right?
Yeah.
So we want to be able to find that balance and find that dialogue.
Or we might skirt around things. Like I think sometimes we skirt around things too, and we want the person to come up with the thing. It's almost like we want the person to say the thing.
Right.
Like I'm going to skirt around the thing the way I'm really feeling because I really want you to show me that I'm important, or that sort of thing. So we're not actually being clear and honest and direct with what it is we want, need, or desire, and then as a result, and are wanting our partners to figure it out, and then as a result, feeling resentful when we don't get it.
Right. So we're wanting them essentially to be mind readers if we're not well communicating, right? Yeah. But the other thing is that when we do communicate whatever it is that is of issue to us, we might hope, or we might have an expectation that they're going to be able to hear that and then offer us something. But if they can't, and also in addition to that, can we offer some alternative, some solution, right? So we might be able to convey what it is we might be preferring. That's also important.
Yeah, and it could be, I'm not comfortable with this right now. May we revisit it again in 2 weeks, or can we have conversations about XYZ first and then go back? Because I'm like, I'm hearing this from people I'm talking to currently, some of the things that they're facing, and they agree to something and then something happens and then they feel they can't change that because now either other people are involved or which is fair, which is totally fair. They feel stuck in a situation. Or they don't want to be in that same agreement, or they want to revisit it because they didn't anticipate something. Like I think it's a common thing that people face.
But often we don't know how we're going to feel in the future, right? I mean, we might anticipate, but then when we actually get there, maybe it feels different, and we are well within our rights to want to make these modifications, these ratifications. We are plastic, we change, but most importantly, we are doing what is consensual. And if we're not wanting to do it, then we retract that consent and we revisit it so that we can find something that is more appropriate, something that is more to our wanting and liking.
Yeah, because I think sometimes people feel that they have to continue what they agreed, and it's okay, I will eventually get over it, or if I'm the only one suffering, that's okay. But then what happens is that makes, I would say that, you could let me know what you think. It makes the situation even worse.
Right, you're taking on the role of martyr, and you're just kind of holding it, swallowing it, and then yes, it'll make it worse because it perpetuates, and then you're left feeling as though you're getting the short end of the stick, which is the resentment.
Okay, so we're on to number 3, engage in active listening. Woo, active listening.
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about what that means, what that looks like, how we go about it?
All right, so Aubrey, I think, said it well. Active listening is when you listen to understand instead of to respond.
Listen to understand instead of respond. Okay.
And sometimes if you've fallen into a pattern of not having active listening with someone, it's a really great idea, and I've asked clients to do this before, is to take turns being the active listener, like if you've gotten into this cycle. So being curious, listening, and that sort of thing. So basically, when you're active listening, you like I said, you're listening to understand, but not to respond. You're not thinking about what you're going to say next. So you're ideally not asking questions other than to confirm understanding. So some of the things that you might do are you might use nonverbal cues to show that you're understanding. So nodding, eye contact, leaning forward, that sort of thing. So brief verbal affirmations.
Okay. Right. Okay.
I know.
Those are two.
I see.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
I understand.
Sure.
Avoid interrupting. I'm going to raise my hand as someone who's not great at interrupting sometimes, especially when things are heated, but avoiding interrupting or saying buts or saying your opinion or thinking of the next thing to say. So really just listening and being curious about what is being said, what perspective are they trying to share with you.
Okay.
Like trying to open your mind, despite if you may disagree with the facts and how they're presenting it. I think it's important to understand that they're sharing this because they feel a certain way, whether or not it's true or not what they're saying. Do you agree?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that active listening to understand rather than respond. And I was practicing it. I was really trying to listen to you. And then I thought of something that I wanted to say to add. And I realized I'm not listening anymore. I'm not listening to understand. I'm wanting to offer you my response. So my thought, right? Can we hold two thoughts at once at the same time? Some people say we cannot. So if I already have that response that I'm wanting, not quite. So if I already have that response in my mind, my thought, have I then stopped that active listening? Have I stopped listening to understand what it is you're saying?
I think sometimes what I was just trying to do, and I think it might work, is look in your eyes, because it's really hard for me to think of what I'm responding to when I'm looking in your eyes, mostly because I like looking in your eyes.
So my eyes are distracting?
Okay, so building trust and establishing rapport. So if it's appropriate, and maybe this is after the person has shared, tell me what I can do to help. You know, if you truly want to help, you know.
And sometimes just being emotionally present and listening might be enough of a start in that help, right? Maybe it's not action based, but simply being there, as opposed to the person who's trying to communicate the idea feels like, well, they're not even listening. They're like, you know, they're not even present. They're a million miles away. So really resisting going away and trying to be present to listen actively might be the first indication that we are communicating well.
And maybe you practice it for a short period of time. Like if you're really stuck in a cycle of repetition, conflict, and that sort of thing, it's like, let's take turns, 5 minutes. Right. I'm going to speak, you active listen, and vice versa, and then increase that time.
Or decrease it.
Or decrease it, yeah. Oh, because you don't need to actively sit there like for 5 minutes and go like, oh my God, I have to just listen.
Yeah, and as it becomes more skilled, it becomes more organic, right? And then we'll find a way to do it. But I find also when I'm speaking and the other person's speaking, I'm no longer listening. So I have to really kind of wait for my turn in order to speak, which I don't always do.
But you have to not wait for your turn too. That's the thing. Because if you're waiting for your turn, are you thinking about what you're going to say when it's your turn?
Good question.
Interesting. Yeah. So some of the things you could also do as part of active listening is briefly paraphrase. So you're saying that XYZ. So just to confirm understanding. So, or if the person's saying something that they'd like, I understand that you'd like XYZ. You can just say, thank you for sharing this. Like not like let them continue before you say, but I can't do this.
Right. So we reiterate what the other person's saying, and it's a way of confirming that we've heard and understood what they've said. And then the other person who said it feels as though, oh wow, like yeah, they got what I was saying. They understood it. They reiterated what I was saying. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Oh, you just did it. Oh, Drang is saying Raja Yoga, I'm probably killing it, is will help learn to control one's thoughts, which includes holding different thought streams at the same time. Ooh, okay, that's definitely something to look up because I wasn't aware of that. So that's awesome.
Yeah,
cool.
Thank you for the share.
Thank you.
Yes.
Such an awesome participant. Okay, we love our members. Okay, so that was active listening number 3. And number 4, which I think is a big one, and I think it feeds into some of the other things, is to be aware of your own beliefs, investments that you're bringing into the conversation. So I think it goes back to those, like that diagram where you have these like, what do they call them? Spheres of influence or noise. Sometimes it's noise too, right? Yes. There might be noise, which is outside things as well, but yeah.
Okay.
So sometimes we fill in the blanks for what we think the person's going to say. So that's another thing with active listening is we're listening, but we're not really listening because we believe something about what it is they have to say. And I know this is also true. No matter what they say to us, we're going to say, no, I believe that this is what they really want. So you're saying to me that no, like, so here's an example. No, right now I'm not interested in overnight dates with partners. And I think to myself, nope, I don't agree with that. That's what he really wants. He's just waiting for my defenses to come down. Right. So I've decided what you think, whereas we need to work towards believing what people have to say. And that's hard. Like, it's not easy. I'm saying, like, we're saying these things. It's not like it's like, ooh, it's so easy. Sure. It's hard to get past your beliefs, especially because we bring our experience into it.
Right. But we get that awareness of that, right? I'm aware that I've already decided your beliefs, what you're going to say. I know she's going to object to this. I know that she's not, and then I become frustrated, but I've no longer given you the opportunity to communicate your ideas, right? I've already preempted it, and that's not communicating.
So what if we know that's the situation? So what if I know that I'm bringing that belief in?
Well, that mindfulness should then help inform us, right? So I already know that that's my tendency to do. What other way might I be? Can I suspend all that I already know about you, or that I believe I know about you? Can I suspend all that and remain open, or at least neutral, to what might be permissible? So it will allow for some greater degree of progressive communication, that the next thing would be said about it, as opposed to feeling as though I already know what's going to be said about it.
Okay.
So I want to remain open to what you might have to say about it. Yeah.
Maybe a gesture would help.
Perhaps.
Okay. Scroll. Okay. So sometimes because of our beliefs, even before a conversation starts, we can be already rejecting or closed-minded or defensive.
Sure.
You're positioning yourself for that. And it's really hard to see beyond that when we've made that decision at the beginning of a conversation or at some point during the conversation.
Right. Yeah. And then if we are already defensive like that, that's going to frame how the conversation is going to go. It's that energy that we are bring into it, right? We are already going to be coming from that perspective, and that transference will be picked up by the other person, and they are going to be reacting in a way of that as well. So can we remain open and generous in spirit when we are talking this way? Can we ourselves, not only are we wanting the other person to be open to us, but can we ourselves afford to be that way? Because very often you get what you give.
Right.
So are you simply wanting to have this conversation to get your own way, or are you really willing to see the other person's perspective and then have a better understanding of where they're coming from, and might that then influence how you're going to be with it?
I like that.
Yeah. So
yeah.
See if you're
Can
able to
you,
do that.
if someone's already on the defensive and you feel it, are there things that you think that people can do?
Absolutely. So what is a defense? A defense is our efforts to create security. If I feel very secure, I don't need as high a defense. So if I am very defended, I am feeling insecure.
Okay.
So I recognize the other person might be defensive. I know that that is often an indication of their insecurities. How can I make them feel more secure? When they feel more secure, the need for the defense comes down and it becomes more open trade.
Mm-hmm. So can you do that in the moment?
Well, yeah, you practice that mindfulness, right? You are aware that there's a feeling of defense here. There are offerings that are feeling defensive. And as such, we practice the idea that we might offer some form of demonstration that would help them to feel more secure. So there's less reliance on their defense.
So you wouldn't say like, I'm feeling that you're being defensive?
You might, but what do you think the reaction would be like?
Not great, more defense.
The person would be like, what do you mean? I'm not defensive. It's like, you're the one, and then off we go.
Could you put it back on yourself? Like, I'm feeling that I'm not communicating
is there
in a
something
supportive way, or
sure.
is there something that I can do? I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's great. So you might ask open-ended questions like, I'm wondering if what I'm saying would make somebody feel defensive, right? Is there a way that I might, do something that would make you feel more comfortable? And by asking open-ended questions, we're inviting the dialogue, right?
Okay. Okay, cool.
So those are good things to know.
Yeah. So we talked about being curious about your own reaction to what is being said as well as the listener. So resisting what they have to say.
Resisting what they have to say.
Yeah, what's being said, or really resisting listening to it, because maybe it's something we don't want to hear, or we don't believe them, or that sort of thing. So and sometimes when the listener, the person is speaking how they feel, and they have a belief about us as a person, or something we did, or something we want, which isn't true. So then, instead of being defensive, can we be more curious about what it is they're saying and why they might feel that way, and what we might be doing that might be contributing to that.
Right. Yeah. What might we be doing that be contributing? That's important.
Yeah, because our intent may not to be for someone to feel jealous or insecure in our relationship. We may be taking actions or saying things or doing things or not doing things that may be contributing it to that for that person, even if it's a belief of theirs. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Awesome.
That's nice.
Number 5.
Engage in progressive communication.
Yeah, I like this idea of progressive communication. I hadn't heard that term before. And I have to be honest, I looked it up on the internet to see if I could find a definition. And I'm sure there's a great one in there, but maybe it's an André thing. But I think I found a lot of organizations called progressive communication, which weren't the thing.
So what do you think progressive communication might be, really?
It's
from what I said about it. What's your impression about it?
So progressive communication is that you're moving the dialogue on to the next thing. So it's not getting stuck in a certain place. Like you're not going on a cyclical loop of activity or that sort of thing.
Right. So when I was talking to you about it, I had this example that came to my mind. It's like, we have an argument, or two people have an argument, and they say, oh my God, like I've told her 1,000 times that like, Well, you've told them 1,000 times. You're telling them the same message essentially over and over and over.
Yeah.
So what have you said that's going to be interpreted in any way differently or be received in any way differently? So progressive communication is, what can we do or say that's going to create a new position, a new offering, a new thought, a new feeling that moves the conversation beyond just that repetition.
Movement.
Right. So is there another way of picking up? So ideally, I'd love to be able to say it and the other person's going to get it in a whole new way. But am I throwing it always like too low or too high?
Oh, yeah.
Is it in the box? So maybe I might find another way of saying it differently that will add to that, right?
Cool.
So look at my part in it and then see how it might be received differently.
Yeah, received differently so that you have a different thought. Oh, hi, Melissa. Such a great topic. Communication is not as straightforward as like to be. Sure. Exactly. Yeah. Well said.
But when we practice it, we get better and better at it, right?
We do. Yeah. Sometimes there's blocks though, and people have to get past those blocks. And like that's part of why we do what we do, and we help people work through those things. Because while we say there's like, 5 things you can do, those 5 things aren't as also as easy as they sound, right? So, because you get stuck, like, and I've been definitely in that situation where you get stuck in a position where you're not progressing to the next thing. And I think that's exactly what happened to us yesterday. And you mean, part of it, we can give the example, but part of it, and I knew this and you knew this, is because I was hungry by that point. We had already gone one place, stood in line, decided to leave, went for a walk, tried to find somewhere else. And, you know, like, I was getting hangrier and more frustrated, and I didn't really understand what your position was. I thought I understood it, and then you said something which made me think something differently, and differently. And then and then it progressed from there and got heated.
Well, it's interesting because it touches on the idea of halt, right? So hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. And were we a little bit tired, perhaps, the night before? And were we hungry? Absolutely. And it was sparking some of our anger. So we were trying to make this communication, and we tried a number of times, but essentially I was saying the same thing, repeating it, not getting the effect I wanted. And I think you might have been saying something similar.
I was saying the same thing too.
And we were not getting, there was no progressive communication. We were fixed on that position, and we were just going at it. So we became heated.
Yes.
I became frustrated. I was like, well, how many times do I have to tell her? But I was communicating the same thing over and over, hoping for a different outcome, which we know to be the partial definition of insanity, right?
Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same results.
So my my quick reaction, my quick solution was, well, can we take a time out? Can we just stop for a moment? And that's at times beneficial because it can stop the escalation, but it's not going to solve the issue at hand.
And sometimes it can get someone's back up too. Like, there, I just interrupted you.
Well, because I want to say something, and then you're like, well, can we take a time out? And it's like, no, not like, this is my opportunity, my time to say it right now. But sometimes it is best to just take a breath, wait a second, maybe have something to eat or whatever, and then revisit it when we're a little bit cooler,
Which is what we did.
But it's not to say that we're wanting to avoid the situation, we're going to leave it indefinitely. We want to come back, but have it reframed where it is gentler again, where we're a little bit more generous, not only with the other person, but with ourselves. And we might be able to revisit it from a different perspective when we're feeling a little bit cooler. And then we can unpack it and see the components. Well, what was really at play here? And it wasn't really about which restaurant we're going to. It was about, do I feel as though my needs are being heard and understood? Do you feel that your needs are being heard and understood? Do you feel as though you can openly and honestly communicate? Do you feel that I am being open and honest in my communication? I think those are the real components at play. And then
then I brought in my whole other situation that I experienced with somebody before, which was affecting how I was feeling as well.
Right. So you had that previous experience and you transferred that into how you were receiving with me.
And I think about taking breaks is important, because some people will say, oh, it's not good to take breaks. And sometimes, like I said, the timeout or something like that can be very too halting for someone. And then they feel like, oh, they don't want to listen to me anymore. They've decided that the conversation is over. Who are they to decide that our conversation is over? I want to decide. So I think this is the kind of thing that you might want to negotiate in advance, or, if you've had the situation come up, how do we announce that we need a break that's gentle, and that, how are we going to deal with it? And then also with breaks is also deciding when we're going to talk about it again.
Right.
So sometimes, that in the situation, we went and ate and that sort of thing.
We had the luxury of that.
Yeah. But sometimes, people will get in a conversation and they'll be up all night going over the same things over again, which is not progressive.
But there's two schools of thought, and we went out for dinner with friends of ours who've been married for quite a few years and have a successful relationship, and they said that they would prefer to keep staying up. No, just the opposite.
No, the opposite. You said, do you go to bed? Because people always say, oh, never go to bed angry. You hear that at weddings and stuff, speeches.
Right.
My one advice is do not go to bed angry.
But then they were saying, you end up staying up tired and heated in that moment, and it can escalate and get out of control, and then it's harder to come back from. Whereas their solution was, no, go to bed, have a good night's sleep, and then you come back in the morning refreshed, and you have a different perspective, and you're possibly better equipped to be able to adjust those when you have the luxury to be able to delay it for that amount of time. Good advice.
Yeah. Awesome.
But they also, and I think rightly so, said it depends on the dynamics between the people, right? Some people are going to want to address it while it's happening, and other people will be able to say, you know what, it's not that important, we can do it. And that's the other thing. Can we gauge the level of importance in it, right? So does it really need to be addressed at this very moment right now? Perhaps so. Or can we both afford to take a moment to pause, to get something to eat, have a drink, whatever it is, and then come back and be able to look at it from a better place of purity in our heart, of generosity, of understanding, of compassion, right? So I want you to listen to me. I want you to hear all things. I want you, I want you, I want you, all for me. But am I offering those same things? So all the things that I would like from that conversation, how much of that am I willing to offer you? Am I willing to be a good listener? Am I willing to be generous of spirit? Am I willing to be considerate of your position? And when I do that, I will open myself up. And most likely, you will then also be more willing, because you'll see that I am less aggressive, less defensive about it. And then you'll be able to be more calm and relaxed. So we create that invitation for dialogue.
It makes me think of like when people get in like heated situations or repetitive. I mean, we're gonna segue into what causes miscommunication. But like these patterns where we get really invested in those patterns. We're on the offense or the defense. And, and I think about that idea that you're just talking about, opening up yourself when you feel like it's been such a long time that you've been on this offense, defense, cyclical pattern and that sort of thing. Like, how do you get out of the repetition?
Right.
So, I mean, I think that was just going to say is the miscommunication. You're miscommunicating when you are having that repetition, right?
Right. And also when you feel yourself getting tight, right? When you're getting heated, you know that you're not communicating well, because when you feel understood and you feel like you're being received, there's less cause to get heated, right? Yeah.
But I wonder, like, when it's gotten so bad that you're so closed off, like, how do you open yourself up? How do you make the gesture? Like, how do you take that first step?
Well, you can do some of the things that we said and have that mindfulness position, but if it's still not enough, then you might want to speak to somebody who is neutral to it, a third party, a awesomeness coach or a sex positive psychotherapist such as ourselves, or somebody else. There's a lot of wonderful trained people out there who can be a great sounding board for it, and you might, get greater clarity that way. You might be able to pick up something different.
Yeah, because I think people get stuck, like, not only the repetition, but I've experienced in the past is you have the same fight over and over again, or things come up and people bring up things from the past and that sort of thing, and so you get into these terrible patterns, and it is hard to break. It is, but it's like that self-awareness and all that stuff that we talked about. So,
but there's that idea also of escalating in arguments is almost the norm, right? We see it in road rage and stuff, right? People become heated and all of a sudden they lose sight of the actual subjects or the argument, the issues in the argument, and now it's just pure emotion that is talking, right? And all of these different attachments, all these different things get thrown into it, and we have to try and resist that, right? We have to find a way to de-escalate. Right? But I think a big part of that is through the practice of this, finding more successful ways of doing it, and we become more secure in our ability to communicate that way, and also to have that mindfulness, that awareness that am I speaking out of a too much emotion? Am I being too heated in this? And when I become aware of that, I might take a step back, take a breath, and say, okay, wait a second, let's, I'm going to go on the assumption that the other person at the other end of my communication wants to receive that pass. They want to hear it. As we're coming together to find a solution, to find that. So we believe that the other person is also wanting to find that place where we are well received and loved.
Yeah, can you suspend the belief that they're not there for that? If they're engaging in a conversation with them, can you take on the belief that they're there to listen? Yeah, ultimately, I think people don't want to have miscommunication.
Right.
Because when those things happen, we just become defensive, we shut down, we feel like we're not being heard.
We employ sarcasm.
Sarcasm, oh my God, I hate sarcasm.
Very dangerous. I love it. I'm like the best at it.
Well, the thing is, if that happened, you are pretty good at it. But then it's like you don't believe anything. Like sometimes I think sometimes I don't know when you're being sincere. And I think that sometimes causes friction with us, is that I'm hearing something and I'm like, is he being sarcastic? is it, like, I can't remember, you said something today and I was like, was that sarcasm? Like, I really wasn't sure. And,
Sincere, sarcastic, or cynical?
Sincere, sarcastic, or cynical.
Mm-hmm.
2 S's and a C. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think and then the worst thing would happen is if you do feel like you're not being heard, or things are just so bad, you just shut down entirely.
Yeah.
And then
I'd actually take the sarcasm over the silence, right? Because when there's no more dialogue, it really gets tough to recreate that and jumpstart that, and it's often, unfortunately, an indication of some level of disinterest, right? We're not interested in doing that anymore. But it's also, the silence can very often, unfortunately, be a position of defense, right? People are afraid to say something, so they just kind of retreat and they go underground.
Well, that's it as well. Someone's might not be speaking because they're afraid to speak. And I've heard that. I'm sure you've heard about that before too. Like, they're not sure I don't want to say anything anymore.
Right.
Everything I say is wrong. Like, I had a couple stay right in front of me, each of them say that they were both wrong. And I was like, it's so interesting. If you're both wrong, then what's right?
But it's interesting. I don't know what to say anymore. Well, can you find a different way of saying it? Or can you say something different?
So, progressive communication.
Right. So if you can't shift their perspective, can you shift your own in order to add to the progressive communication? Can you find a way? But the point is, keep talking to your partner, or keep talking to your therapist or your coach, and find a way to talk through it. Yeah. It's all about saying everything, communication.
And I think the thing is, if, you're with someone and it just, it gets so bad, like, there may come to a time where you realize that maybe things aren't right between you, or the situation is not working for you. And I think that that's legitimate, and it happens, and all of that. But I think the skills that you'll learn from practicing communication and working through yourself and on your beliefs and your listening will serve you for like a lifetime.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And when you are able to communicate, there's a greater chance that your relationship will be successful, regardless of whether it's romantic or sexual or professional or
all your relationships, families, everything. Yeah, families teach you interesting patterns of communication.
Boy, yeah.
Anyway, well, that was a great chat.
Yeah, sure was.
I really enjoyed communicating and listening to you.
I was happy to hear you.
Aw. Yes. Anyways, if you enjoyed that, check out our other sessions. What do you call these things? Sessions in the guides. We actually did 2 on communication, I think back in June, I'd say. One was on communication, what to say and how to say it. And one of them was on having difficult conversations. So we talked a bit about some of that stuff, including active listening and that sort of thing, but you may want to check those out as well.
Yeah, what to say. It makes me think also of what not to say. There's some things that should definitely be avoided.
Yeah. Well, is there?
Does this dress make me look fat?
Does it? Is that what you're saying?
On that note, we are unfortunately out of time.
Thank you for joining and listening to us. As always, if you have any questions, you want to reach out and chat with us, we are here. Join us on Thursday for our jealousy workshop. Don't forget to register, and let us know what you're thinking. So next week's N, we'll have to figure out what is N.
Oh, so many good M words that we did not get into, right?
Yeah.
Like masochism,
masturbation,
misandry, misogyny, so many great things.
Yeah. You said masturbation this morning, and I was like, damn, we missed that opportunity. We'll have to find that somewhere else. Luckily, there's still some letters of the alphabet left.
Yes.
So N, nudity? No. Nudism?
Necrophilia.
Necrophilia.
We'll figure it out.
But if you have ideas, open to suggestions. Have a great Monday, everyone, and we'll talk soon. Bye. And hopefully see you Thursday.